Hi, I'm Cindy Morales. Welcome back to the Shout My Story podcast, where we share stories of women who choose life in difficult circumstances and the women who help them. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, and share to our YouTube channel. And you can also listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and a variety of other places that you can see at the end of this video on YouTube. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Suzanne Guy. Suzanne is just a huge presence in the pro-life movement. Her bio is about a half an hour long, so here are some highlights. She has been called the heartbeat of the pro-life movement in Georgia. She counseled women for 11 years at a pregnancy resource center, and she co-chairs the Atlanta 40 Days for Life with her daughter, Rachel Mary. She is a public speaker and works with churches to develop pro-life ministries. She's been involved in Georgia politics in the Cause for Life. But the biggest reason I'm speaking with her today is she is Rachel Mary's mom. Now, I met Rachel Mary back in 2018 at the March for Life when we were just starting the Shout My Story project, and she has been one of the most successful stories on Facebook. Her little 3.5-minute video that we filmed out in the behind, the Capitol is there, we're outside. It was very casual, 6.2 million views. So I've got the story from Rachel Mary's perspective, but today I'm going to hear from Suzanne. So thank you so much for being on the show, Suzanne.
Cynthia, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you do so tirelessly for the cause of life.
Oh, I don't think my bio is a half an hour long.
I think it is.
So tell me, I don't remember, how old is Rachel Mary now?
Now she is 26 years old.
That's what I was thinking. All right. So let's go back 26 years and 9 months or whatever and talk about, what was your life like back then? What was going on with you?
Well, my husband and I had been married around 6 years-ish and had struggled with infertility for many, many years, which for me personally, Pete had really reconciled with that issue. But for me, it was really a lonely, painful journey. Lonely, not meaning Pete and I were on that journey together, but there was just something inside of me that just felt such a depth of sadness and loneliness. And God really brought me through that journey to a place where I really was freed up to embrace the situation that we had found ourselves in. And I started pursuing going back to school to become a teacher. And God, as only God could, really started to give me a peace and a relinquishment to Him about the whole infertility situation. So Pete and I were at a space where, we're nurturing and investing in our marriage. I was going back to school to get a master's of education. And we continued to pray that God would bless us with a child, but we carried it. I personally was carrying it in a very different way, that I was freed up from the loneliness and the sadness and despair that was so attached to the infertility journey.
So you must have been over the moon when you found out you were pregnant.
Oh, my stars. Cynthia, I will tell you something I always tell everybody is I was screaming it from the rooftops. And I even had some friends say to me, Suzanne, a lot of times people wait till after the first trimester or farther along to tell everybody. And I said, oh no, I said, God has blessed us with a child, and I am going to scream it from the rooftops. And I just cannot begin to convey the excitement and gratitude that we had to get that amazing news on that fateful day that I saw the lines show up on the pregnancy test.
There was no indication at all in the early ultrasounds that there would be a problem, right?
There wasn't, but I will tell you this. We were referred to a particular doctor, a particular practice, because we had struggled for so long with infertility. It was highly recommended to us to, the way it was described to us, go to one of the best hospitals, practices, doctors. So when we were referred to them, we never thought to question it. And in the journey at one point, they had done a specific test somewhat early on in the first trimester where the doctor came back and said, hey, your test results, I think it's an alpha fetoprotein test, but don't quote me on that. But they said, your test results show there is a chance that your child might have Down syndrome. So we need to do an amniocentesis. Cynthia, this should have been the first red flag. And it was a red flag, but not to the degree that I wish it really would have been to me, because, I remember telling him, that doesn't matter to us. That's not even an issue. And we love our child no matter, what's going on with the child. And I will not have an amniocentesis because I know there is a chance, even though it's small, there is a chance that it could harm the child. And he was very frustrated when I refused the amniocentesis. So that was very discouraging to me, and should have been a huge red flag, but it was the beginning of many red flags. So that's what led up to him saying, very frustratedly, fine, if you won't do that, come back and we will do a level 2 ultrasound. That was around 20 weeks for what I think was called the anatomy scan, but it was 22 weeks where we got news that we did not expect.
Okay, so at 22 weeks, I thought, okay, so what happened exactly at that time?
So at 22 weeks, we had gone in at 20 weeks, but they weren't able to see everything they wanted to see. So they told us to come back at 22 weeks. So my husband and I were so excited, planning, on this very important appointment and excited to see the baby. And my husband at the last minute got a business trip. But because this was so important for us to go to this appointment, we were so excited about this that Pete said, you go ahead and go without me. So that was the appointment where I went, and I'm lying on the ultrasound table, seeing the most beautiful image I've ever seen of our daughter. I did not know at the time she was a girl. And the ultrasound tech said, hey, I need to excuse myself and go get a doctor in the practice. And that's where a doctor that I'd never met before in the practice came in and instantly started saying in a very animated, frantic voice, half your amniotic fluid is gone. Your baby must have a chromosomal abnormality not compatible with life. You could die, and your baby most certainly will die. You need to have an abortion.
And was your husband there, or had he gone on his business trip?
He was off on a business trip.
Oh.
So this started a conversation back and forth between this OBGYN and myself of me telling her I was not going to have an abortion. I would never have an abortion. And her trying to convince me how important having an abortion was and how that was the only solution. And after me explaining and refusing that I would not do that, she, very similar to what I experienced when I was saying I would not do the amniocentesis, she kind of threw up her hands and said, fine, come back in 2 weeks. And I went home and called my husband sobbing, explaining what had happened, something I never in my wildest dreams. I had no idea. Pete had no idea that doctors, those that take an oath to do no harm, tell parents to have an abortion, tell parents that the solution to their precious child's issue inside the womb is to target that child for destruction. So we couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking, boy, this is one bad doctor in the practice. She's lost her mind. And Pete said, look, I'll call your main doctor and let him know what she's saying. This is madness. And so Pete did call my primary OBGYN, and his response was, well, just tell Suzanne to drink more water.
Okay, that's going to help the amniotic. Time out a minute. My understanding, I'm not a doctor, is that your amniotic fluid replaces itself. Like if your water breaks early,
right,
it will replace itself every 4 hours. So it's not the big freak out that doctors seem to make it. But I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so
there is something physiologically that was explained to me that's what usually happens, which is why they were so concerned that there was half the amniotic fluid gone. Then when my husband and I went back at 24 weeks, all the amniotic fluid was gone. And I think that's part of the reason, although I cannot say for sure, part of the reason that they were so persistent and insistent on the abortion, saying there was a chromosomal abnormality not compatible with life, which one, they had no idea, and she didn't end up having that. But two, and even more important, is all of a sudden, Just because of a prenatal diagnosis, they completely stripped her of her value, considered her disposable, and instead of doing what real healthcare would do, which is fight for that child, fight for that mom, they just completely wrote her off and targeted her for destruction, which for my husband and I, we were utterly shocked. Now, the world that I've been operating in for so many years, tragically, I have found out this is not uncommon. But at the time, we were shocked.
It's so not uncommon that we actually made a film about it called Incompatible with Life. And Rachel's the one that gave me the idea for the title, because in her little story that she gave us at the March for Life, she starts out going, "You may not know this, but I'm incompatible with life." She's like 20 years old at the time. So you 24 weeks, did you go on bed rest then?
No, that's another thing. These doctors not only targeted Rachel for destruction, but they said there was a chance that I could lose my life if I didn't abort, and they did nothing for me. The only thing they said that they would do is an abortion. So when we went back at 24 weeks and all the amniotic fluid was gone, and my husband was with me this time, very similar situation, we told the same OBGYN we would not abort. She then sent us to speak with another doctor. Once I got cleaned up and got the gel off my stomach, we went to this other doctor's office. And he went through what felt like an abortion campaign of telling us all the reasons that we needed to abort. Never suggested bed rest to take care of both of us, to treat both patients, just all the reasons to abort. And when we refused over and over, and my husband said, "What will you do for us since we will not abort?" Cynthia, he said the most chilling words, and he said it in the most calm, bone-chilling way. He said, "In all my years of practice, nobody in your position has ever not aborted. So go home, wait for your baby to die, and you will give birth to a stillborn child."
Okay, so you went home.
So we went home, and here is what I consider truly the defining moment. You know, we started sharing with people so people would pray. We had no intentions of aborting, none. But we had such a level of despair, we were going to just shut ourselves away, not go to work, not go to church, just shut ourselves away. And it just, I can't even put words to it. We loved and love the Lord. But sometimes this world can hit you with a level of despair that without even realizing it, our eyes went on the situation and off the Lord. But enter one capital O, Jesus Christ, and one lowercase o, my mother. And this is such a picture of the power of one, Jesus, through the power of one, an amazing instrument in the hands of the Redeemer. My mom said so simply, so beautifully, not some big, long, drawn out, apologetics conversation. We didn't need that. We weren't going to abort. But my point is, so beautifully and so simply, when we told my mom, she said, "Suzanne, is there still a heartbeat?" And I said, "Well, yes." And she said, "If there's a heartbeat, there's hope. We pray." And in that moment, our eyes, not minimizing the seriousness and gravity of our situation, but our eyes went vertically to Jesus. And we had a renewed bounce in our step, hope. And Cynthia, literally, it was like God saying through my mom, "There is hope. Stop living like she's dead. She has not died. If she dies, we will grieve, but she is very much alive. And there is a fight to be fought." And my mom's simple statement breathed hope and life and compassion into such a desperate situation that gave us a renewed strength and hope, because she was alive and she needed to be fought for. And we went to church that Sunday. An amazing OBGYN at our church, pro-life OBGYN. Who knew? I thought all OBGYNs were pro-life. She talked to my husband. She said, "I know your doctor, and I am going to call him on Monday." So she called him. She calls us, and she says, "I talked to him, and I said, won't you at least honor Suzanne and Peter's request to fight for their daughter's life? Won't you at least do some more tests? And his reply to her was, the only test I will offer them is an autopsy.
So he was very hard of heart.
Oh, hard, hopeless, and abortion determined. But because of his response, she reached out to some other OBGYN friends of hers at a different practice at a different hospital who said, we will honor this family's request to fight for their child. Not only honor the request to fight for their child, acknowledging the value and beauty of our daughter's life, no matter what her health condition was. They did not look at her through the lens of a prenatal diagnosis. They looked at her through the same lens that we were, which this is an incredible human being made in the image of Almighty God, no matter what is or isn't wrong. She deserves to be fought for. And they instantly put me on bed rest. I had not received any care. Both patients, both Rachel and I, were not being treated by this other practice. We were both being dismissed.
So at 24 weeks, you switched practices.
Yes.
And you went on bed rest. And then Rachel was born a couple weeks later, right?
Yes. At 26 weeks, they had to do a C-section because she was running into trouble. I was running into trouble. So they did a C-section.
Time out. So while you were on bed rest, were you in the hospital? Were they constantly monitoring her, like with a fetal heart monitor or whatever?
Yes, Cynthia, outstanding question. And sorry I get ahead of you. Something so amazing about this practice was they saw both patients and they protected and treated and fought for both patients. I was immediately put on bed rest. A fetal heart monitor was put on my stomach to keep track of what was going on with Rachel. She was seen as the valuable, made in God's image individual that she was. And they were also monitoring me. So I stayed in the hospital the entire time until they decided to take her via C-section on the first day of my 26th week, 14 weeks early.
Okay, so back then, 26 years ago, what was the likelihood of her survival?
Very unlikely. They said that the field, they called her, they said when she was born, if she was born alive, and they said there was a chance that she would not be born alive, they said it would be like getting a pit out of a peach because there was no amniotic fluid. And they said they would call her a micropreemie. And they said because that field was so new, because most babies were not living that were born that early, that in many ways they didn't know exactly what to expect, but they were committed to fight and to be prepared that there was a strong likelihood that she would not be born alive or live.
And obviously she was. What were some of the complications she had? Real briefly, because I want to get to some other stuff too. So really briefly, she comes out, she's alive, yay. What did they have to do to keep her that way?
She was surrounded by the most incredible doctors that delivered her, and at the NICU, as well as the most amazing NICU nurses and specialists. The biggest concern was that her lungs were so incredibly premature at that time that the biggest concern was the state of her lungs. If I'm remembering correctly, it seems like as soon as she was born, they gave her something called surfactant that was supposed to help, but she literally was on a ventilator called an oscillator. And for quite some time, she was in the hospital 5.5 months. It was a roller coaster ride. But I will tell you what, she was alive. And we were so thankful she was alive that roller coaster ride was one that we thanked God that we were allowed to be on because she was alive. And something God so taught us is none of us is guaranteed tomorrow. So embrace the moment that you have been given. And we so embraced every moment with Rachel Mary, knowing there were no guarantees about the next moment because her lungs were such a train wreck. She was so incredibly premature and small. And I will tell you, even though it was low lows and high highs, and on regular basis, they would say, we don't know. If she gets an infection, she will die. We don't know. I mean, every day was just they just didn't know, is she going to do well, is she going to do poorly? At one point they had to do what is called bagging her because she was in such bad shape. One of these precious doctors put this what looked like a blue balloon over her face and just bagged her. These people at the NICU, doctors, nurses, specialists, were some of the most God sent angels, extraordinary human beings that never gave up on her and saw her value. So her life really taught Pete and me, embrace the moment that you've been given because you don't know if you have the next moment. And in that was an absolute radical abandonment to self, death to self, and a love and joy, embracing the gift of her in that moment.
I'm sure that your faith is probably a huge reason why you were able to handle this, because I think there's two things. One, people who don't have faith don't always see the value of the human person. But secondly, they don't see the value of suffering. So I would imagine that she didn't have lungs, she had to be bagged. She was in the hospital 5 minutes. She suffered.
Oh, yes.
What would you say to someone who's like, how could you put your baby through that? That she suffered?
I would say in this life, no one escapes suffering. And the goal of this life is never to deal with suffering in a way that would stop us from fighting the good fight. We all suffer this side of eternity. For some people, it's a cancer diagnosis. For some people, it is a divorce. For some people, it's a loss of a loved one. Think of children who get childhood cancer. No parent who receives that diagnosis for their child at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old would ever do anything but fight the good fight for that child. Does that child suffer through some of the chemo treatment, through some of the different things? But you fight with hope, knowing that one day, maybe your child, I'm sorry from crying, my nose is running. You fight the good fight. It shouldn't be any different for these children in the womb and for the children that have conditions outside of the womb after they're born. These children, I would tell someone, are made in the image of God. And even though there is suffering, when you fight that good fight, you are fighting it because they are valuable, they are worth fighting for, and you are praying that one day they will be free of that suffering. And there are things in place in the medical community. There are medications that can help, ease the pain, ease the suffering. But just because somebody's going to suffer in this life does not mean that you rob them of the gift of life. It makes you hunker down and fight the good fight even more.
Good answer, in my opinion. You obviously were pro-life before Rachel came along, but you weren't a pro-life activist, correct?
Correct. Cynthia, this is such an important part of our story, and it honestly drives so much of the work that I do today. I was in college. I would have called myself pro-choice. Now I say pro-abortion because that's what it is. I had a powerful encounter with the Lord in college, and I gave my life to him. And one of the first things he convicted me of so clearly, in a sea of so much material to convict me of, one of the first things he convicted me of was, Suzanne, you're not only loving that distinct human being made in my image inside the womb, but you are also not loving that woman, because abortion is not loving women. And I instantly repented and asked God for forgiveness and had a whole heart dramatic change. I said, God, I will vote for people that are pro-life. I will champion women and care about babies. But Cynthia, I had no idea what that looked like or ways to engage. And I was surrounded by people, some that were pro-life, some that weren't, and many that just didn't give a darn one way or another. So I went through the years having no idea that there were incredible pregnancy resource centers serving women in crisis. I had no idea that I could say to my church, we need to do more on the life issue, because the churches I was attending at the time never spoke about the life issue, which is one of the biggest tragedies in our nation still to this day. And one of the driving forces in my life is to engage the Church of Jesus Christ to be a loving megaphone for the life issue. So all this to say, I called myself pro-life. I would go toe-to-toe with anyone on the life issue, but I did nothing. And I have such a deep passion for the body of Jesus Christ, no matter where you align yourself religiously, no matter what church you call home, to know that there are ways to engage, to serve precious women and men that find themselves in unplanned, unwanted, and crisis pregnancies, and for the church to be more vocal. It truly was not until we went through everything with Rachel that I knew we would never abort. I was mortified that the medical field said that, absolutely shocked, stunned, and thought that we just got the world's most unethical doctors, not realizing that this was common and this is actually what's even taught in the medical field. But it was her life that made me yet again go to God and say, I will find ways to engage. I will do whatever it takes to engage the church, to get involved. And now I go around not only talking to churches about being vocal in love with hope about the life issue, but also rallying the troops in Georgia. I started a pro-life group where I introduced ministries and people to one another all over Georgia to say there is a way for every single human being to engage in the life issue. Pregnancy resource centers, 40 Days for Life, sidewalk advocates for life. There are so many ways to be a part of the solution, because this is God's very heart that we battle for and stand up for these precious children in the womb, especially those that are targeted in the hard cases like Rachel, those given a prenatal diagnosis, battling for those that were conceived in rape, and they are also targeted through no fault of their own, targeted because of manner of conception, which doesn't make any difference at all. We don't punish children because of the sins of the father. So it is these hard cases that are near and dear to my heart, because even some pro-lifers, pro-life legislators, churches, target children in the womb and strip them of their humanity just because they have a health condition.
I think that they're afraid to engage in the hard cases because it makes you sound uncompassionate. The other side, I truly believe that they think they're being compassionate when they offer abortion, especially in the so-called hard cases. And so when you say things like, well, we don't punish the child for the sins of the father, and they're thinking, yeah, but what about the mother? What about the mother? You're making her carry the rapist baby. What about that mother who has to give birth to a child that's going to die? How can you do that to the mother? And so they're thinking we don't sound compassionate, but they don't understand that if you have a sick child, you are going to have that baby. And you're going to either have a live baby or a dead baby. And the people that I've talked to whose child is life-living condition, they're not going to survive long outside the womb. The women who choose to carry have the outlook like, well, I'm keeping my baby as safe as long as I can. I'm giving them the best life they can. It's going to be in my womb, because when they come out of it, they're going to die. And so they have a very, very different mentality. The women that we interviewed for the 40 film that were victims of rape, one of the most profound things one of them said was, she had an abortion as a result of rape, and she regretted it. And she said, I didn't kill my rapist baby. I killed my baby. And I regret that, and I think of that baby every day of its life. So, okay, so you know what? We're out of time. I'm going to have you back, because there's a lot more I want to talk to you. So thank you so much for being on the show, and we are going to have you back. So if you have a story to share, please drop me a line at info@shoutmystory.org. I'm Cindy Morales, and this is the Shout My Story podcast. Thanks for listening.